YouTube. Welcome back, man, to another reaction. We got top 10 dark cartoon theories too real. Way too real to ignore. You see, I got my twin still here. You know, we back with another one. You know it. Let's get straight into this.
Waiting to see this.
Facts, no cap.
So, starting off this countdown, we have Tommy Taffy. So, in the episode titled Freaky Fred, Muriel's cousin Fred pays them a visit. However, this episode starts to take a dark turn when we learn that Fred has an obsession with shaving people's hair. Now, Fred bears some interesting resemblances to the creepypasta creature Tommy Taffy. So, Tommy Taffy is said to come into families' homes and terrorize them. You have to do as Tommy says, or else you will face the consequences. Let's address the similarities. Both Tommy and Fred have golden hair, light eyes, and both have a huge smile. Both Tommy and Fred show up unexpectedly at people's houses and end up torturing the individuals for pleasure. So, people believe that Fred was based on the character Tommy Taffy, or that he in fact is a version of Tommy, or maybe even Tommy's brother. Either way, both those characters look terrifying with their wide smiles. Coming in at number 9, we have Hell. So, this show is said to take place in the middle of nowhere. Shots of the Bag's house show that they live completely isolated from the others in a desert-like environment. But yet, they are still greeted by multiple paranormal monster-type creatures. Well, people theorize that this is because they are actually in a hell-type underworld. The theory continues by making connections to Greek mythology. Eustace resembles Hades, and Muriel resembles Persephone. Now, Courage is supposed to resemble Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the gate to the underworld. Although Courage isn't brave like Cerberus, he does protect his house from all sorts of things. He is also seen to shape-shift his head into other objects when he's trying to warn Muriel. Therefore, he technically does have multiple heads. In our 8th spot, we have the real-life villains.
People
so,
really,
there's no denying
that's one thing. People really be smart out here. Really put 2 and 2 together. They just be like, oh, that's from this, that's from that. Or they be like, oh, that's this, that. I be like, and the thing is, and then when I put it together, I be like, yo.
Real life smart as hell.
Oh, God.
This show has some pretty terrifying villains. What's even more terrifying is that people theorize that some of these villains symbolize real-life people. For example, the character Fred is a sexual predator, and the character Katz is a serial killer. Then you have the character The Perfectionist that teaches Courage how to be perfect, and gets mad whenever he does something that's not perfect according to her standards. So, she is said to suffer from OCD, where everything needs to be perfect. Then you have Eustace and Muriel, who are a couple in an abusive relationship. And lastly, you have the cruel veterinarian character. In the show, this character sent Courage's parents to space, and he tries to do the same to Courage. He is said to resemble Sergei Korolev, a Russian rocket engineer who experimented by sending dogs into space. But then you have some funnier ones, like how King Ramses is a neighbor that Eustace borrowed something from, and then he didn't give it back. So, in the episode, he keeps saying, return the slab, a.k.a. return my pet.
That shit was scary as hell, that episode.
Trimmer, or whatever he borrowed. Moving on to number 7, we have the lost son theory. So, this theory basically states that Eustace and Muriel once were parents to a little boy named Jensen. Now, Eustace was so happy to have a son since he wanted a little mini version of himself. However, when Jensen was 6 months old, a wild animal stole him from his crib. Turns out he was stolen by the Cajun fox, who needed a baby to add to his Cajun baby stew. The Cajun fox in this series is known to cook and eat humans. In the episode Cajun Granny Stew, he tries to kidnap Muriel to use her as an ingredient in his stew. So it might just be that he kidnapped and cooked their baby Jensen. Then, when Muriel saw Courage all alone in the alleyway, she felt that he could fill their empty void and act as a replacement for their lost child. But Eustace wasn't happy with this idea, which is why he's always grouchy and refers to him as the stupid dog. In our 6th spot, we have the abusive owner. Okay, so Eustace isn't the nicest towards Courage. He is verbally abusive to him, constantly yelling at him and calling him a stupid dog. Well, this theory believes that Courage is actually a little boy and Eustace is his abusive father. Eustace constantly calls him a stupid dog to make him feel worthless, so he suffers from low self-esteem and just imagines himself as a dog. This also explains why he is constantly afraid. It's years of abuse that has caused him to develop severe anxiety. The only one that truly loves him is his mom. He thinks others will harm him like his father does. That's why when Courage sees other individuals, he suffers from anxiety attacks, thinking they too will abuse him. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the puppets. So during the finale of season 1, Eustace and Muriel were turned into puppets while Courage was controlling them. Well, people believe that for the following episodes, they remained in their puppet form and never turned back into humans. They theorized that Courage continued to act out his life with them. Everything that happened since that episode was all inside his head. He couldn't deal with the loss of his owners, so he pretends that they are still alive by puppeteering them. In our 4th spot, we have the Lost episode. Now, there are so many shows that people claim to have a lost episode, and Courage the Cowardly Dog is no stranger to this phenomena. So, people have created a theory saying that there are multiple lost episodes out there that are much darker and gorier. Let me describe one of the episodes. So, they claim that this episode starts with static before it eventually shows Courage wearing a mask while rocking in a chair. He then drags Eustace and Muriel to the basement and chains them to the wall. He begins to torture them while they beg and cry for him to stop. Then he ties ropes around their necks and strangles them to death. The episode ends with him back in the rocking chair just staring at the camera with a large grin on his face for 2 minutes straight. Creepy. Moving on to number 3, we have the theory that Courage is a real dog. So, dogs are said to be a man's best friend. They are typically very loyal and will protect their owners at any cost. Like you hear stories of dogs getting lost and then traveling miles to find their way back home to their owner. So, what if that's kind of the case for Courage? He's just a regular dog that is trying to protect his owners from any threat. However, the threats he sees aren't real. Let me explain. So, Courage was abandoned as a puppy. That right there can leave any dog traumatized and scared of the world. As a result, he sees all other humans besides his owners as monsters. This explains why Muriel and Eustace aren't bothered by the monsters. In addition, in the opening sequence for every episode, Courage sees his shadow and imagines it as some scary monster. Then, at the end of the opening, Eustace yells at him and says, "Stupid dog, you made me look bad." After he says that, his head morphs into a green monster. So, this means that whenever someone is angry, he views them as a monster. Another instance is in the episode The Quilt Club. In this episode, Courage is afraid of the Stitch sisters, 2 conjoined sisters. But Muriel isn't. Well, that's because in reality, they are just twin sisters. And again, Courage regards them as monsters. So the whole show is from the dog's point of view, who is just so traumatized from his past that he imagines everything is scary and out to get him. In our second spot, we have the true story. Alright, if you weren't already creeped out, you will be now. Turns out that this show may be loosely based on a true story. So this show takes place in the middle of nowhere. Turns out there is a house in New Mexico that bears a strike.
So you've got your own business, and you're doing everything you can to promote it. The marketing doesn't always have to be
In resemblance to the house in the show. If that wasn't weird enough, the owners of the house were an elderly couple that claimed they witnessed strange occurrences while living there, such as paranormal activity, and they claimed to have even seen a creature known as the Skinwalker. The freakiest part? The couple disappeared and only their dog was found at their house. So, could this be true? Did the Skin Taker or another monster kidnap the couple? Looks like we'll never know. Unless someone wants to go investigate, then good luck. Coming in at our number 1 spot, we have the real-life killer. So, this theory surrounds the idea that the entire show is based on the real-life killer, David Parker Ray. David was a kidnapper, murderer, and torturer. Now, David had 3 different tactics that he would use to get to his victims. So, number 1, he would have a sad story to gain sympathy from them, and then the victims would allow them to enter their house. Number 2, he would persuade them with money, and 3, he would cut the phone lines. All of these tactics are used by different villains in the show. The villain, the Storm Goddess, gained entry into the Bag's home by crying and saying she lost her precious dog. The zombie film director entered their home with promises of a large sum of money if they let them shoot at the house. And Le Quack was shown to cut off the cable antenna and then entered the home claiming he was a TV repairman. Now, if those resemblances weren't freaky enough, David was said to disguise himself as different individuals. meaning he would disguise himself as different villains, just like how there are multiple villains in the show. Starting off this countdown, we have the Illuminati.
Okay.
There's a conspiracy theory out there that Arthur has hidden Illuminati symbolism in their show. They are believed to try and recruit kids at a young age to join the Illuminati. For example, several characters' bedrooms...
Nah, this is like a, these are like different cartoons, so that one was about the different one. This one's about...
Arthur, I'm guessing, because I think she said Arthur.
In the show.
Yeah, I think so.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Illuminati. There's a conspiracy theory out there that Arthur has hidden Illuminati symbolism in their show. They are believed to try and recruit kids at a young age to join the Illuminati. For example, several characters' bedrooms appear to have a lot of triangular imagery. On top of that, the all-seeing eye can be seen hidden in the background in multiple locations. In fact, the character Prunella has a lot of Illuminati symbols in her home. On her sister's bookshelf, you can clearly see a pyramid statue with an all-seeing eye on it. Then in her room, right behind her bed, there is clearly a triangle with the all-seeing eye hanging on the wall. This has led fans to believe that Prunella's family, literally a family of rats, are part of something more sinister. Others believe that PBS is the one with a sinister agenda. In our ninth spot, we have the disguised human. So, I don't know about you, but there's something odd about Buster's father. Like, seriously, take a look at him. He looks far more different than all the other adult animal characters. Why? Well, it's said that he is actually a human in disguise as an animal. That's right. It honestly looks like he's a human that just threw on some bunny ears. Well, theory goes that Buster's dad, Bo, fell in love with a rabbit. They both wanted to be together, but it was frowned upon in their society. As a result, whenever Bo visits, he has to disguise himself as a rabbit. Don't believe me that Bo is a human? Well, there was a spin-off show starring Buster called Buster's Postcards. In the series, Buster travels with his dad and visits different countries. The catch being, Buster is in the human world. Everything is live action with real human people. The show is shot in a POV vlogger type style with Buster holding the camera. But we see that he's still an animal, aka his dad has taken him into the human world. Also, shout out to Buster for being the first vlogger out there. In our 8th spot, we have the oppression. Hate to break it to you all, but Arthur may just deal with more mature themes like racism and oppression. So in the show, you see that the main characters are mammals. But where are all the other non-mammals? Well, it's said that the non-mammals are an oppressed minority. As a result, they were shunned from the city where Arthur takes place. I mean, you barely see any ducks or crocodiles. Sometimes you see them in the background of the show, but notice how they are always blue-collar workers. In later seasons, they are hardly ever seen. Well, it's said that the Elwood city slowly gentrified. The non-mammals were oppressed and could no longer afford to live there. In our 7th spot, we have the dying breed. I'm sad to inform you, but Arthur and his family are a dying breed. I mean, in the show, there are few other aardvarks that we see apart from Arthur and his family. And since crossbreeding isn't shown as an option in the show, Arthur is likely to die alone. In fact, it's said that the aardvarks are going extinct. So, after Arthur and all his family members die, that might just be the last of them. Moving on to number 6, we have the coma. Now, I know for almost every show, there's a theory that the main character is in a coma and is imagining all the events that the audience sees. But this theory is much darker than the typical coma theory. The theory goes that Arthur Reed was actually a real-life human boy. One day, his dog, Pal, passed away after being hit by a car. In an effort to make him feel better, his parents took him and DW to their city zoo. However, the night before, a bunch of burglars broke into the zoo and decided to unlock a bunch of the cages so that the animals could easily escape. When the family went to the zoo, the lions ended up escaping their cages and mauled poor Arthur. This attack left Arthur in a coma on the verge of dying. However, just before Arthur went unconscious, he saw a friendly aardvark come to comfort him. As a result, in his coma, Arthur is now dreaming that he is an anthropomorphic aardvark. He imagines that all his friends are also animals, and he is reunited with his dead dog. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the lost episode. Yes, I also know every show also has a supposed lost episode. This one is pretty creepy though. So basically, one day the narrator bought a bunch of tapes from their corner store, including an Arthur one labeled Death of Grandma. It was apparently recorded on March 5th, 1998. The timestamp says 1524, lost the channel. The episode starts off with Arthur's grandma dying. The whole scene was disturbing with loops of characters crying. Then, eventually, Arthur is at her funeral. However, when the casket opens, it was his mom and not his grandma. Suddenly, her eyes shoot open and they are all black, her teeth are yellow, and her skin is heavily wrinkled. All you could hear was DW laughing evilly in the background. The next part of the episode was titled The Recovery, and basically it showed Arthur stabbing DW, abusing his dog, and beating the life out of Kate. Sadly, the supposed tape got destroyed after trying to rewind it, so this episode only exists in memories. Making our way down to list number 4, we have the Master Manipulator. Any guesses to who I'm referring to here? If you guessed DW, then you are correct. DW is shown to be a little evil, unsympathetic girl who often gets in fights with Arthur, but no matter what, she always comes out on top. Why is this? Well, this theory states that DW has control over the entire show. As a result, she can ensure that the outcome always plays out in her favor. She uses this to make her seem like the victim and that Arthur is the real villain. Her goal is to just pin everything against Arthur and make his life a living nightmare. Moving on to number 3, we have the Ghost Child. So in the show, DW is shown to have an imaginary friend that she calls Nadine. It's quite odd that out of all the characters in the show, DW is the only one to have an imaginary friend. Well, theory states that Nadine isn't an imaginary friend. She is in fact a ghost of a child who passed away. How? Well, it said that Arthur was somehow responsible for her death. Nadine is then haunting his family as a way to get back at Arthur. But only DW can see her. And in fact, they get along quite well since they both have a vendetta against Arthur. So now they are best friends who are plotting to get revenge on Arthur. In our second spot, we have the mutated species. This theory states that long ago, the Earth was destroyed after nuclear testing and experiments with biotechnology went wrong. As a result, the entire human race was wiped out. But some animals managed to survive. However, exposure to toxins and radiation caused them to mutate, and over the years evolved into human-like animals, which are the species we see on Arthur. From there, they rebuilt civilization and created a society of their own. And in our number 1 spot, we have the aliens. This next theory states that the entire Arthur show is being acted out by aliens. Yes, aliens. Now, what has led people to believe this? Well, let's take a look at the episode titled The Boy Who Cried Comet. In this episode, Buster is trying to convince others that aliens exist.
You in position yet?
But the episode ends on a really, really weird note. In one of the final scenes, Buster and Brain are discussing alien life. That's when Brain points up and says, maybe there is life up there. Then the camera pans upwards to the ceiling, which is revealed to be the ceiling of a film set. The director then yells cut and an entire crew of aliens is revealed. That's not all. Then all the characters, including Arthur and Buster, remove their heads. And it's revealed that they were aliens all along. It's super weird and creepy and random.
Look at Arthur's face.
Ugly. By aliens and alien costumes.
Starting us off, number 10 is the Afterlife Cul-de-sac. So what is the only show on Cartoon Network set in a cul-de-sac? Ed, and Eddie. Dog D was my favorite, let me just put it out there. He deserved more lines and appreciation, I'm just saying. Anyway, this theory is actually wild. It claims the kids who lived in the cul-de-sac are actually all dead, and the neighborhood is some kind of afterlife / purgatory. Since all the kids are different ages, they all died between 1900 and 2000, but because they all died in the cul-de-sac, they all stayed there. Think about it, the show has no other kids, no parents, just the kids we see, and even they are a bit weird. I mean, they all look a bit sickly, they all have blue tongues, which like, hello, corpse tongues. Okay, say if we had to analyze the kids, Rolf is farm obsessed and tends to his animals, so he probably died in the early 1900s. Ed and Sarah from the 50s because Sarah is controlling as hell, and Ed is a dumbass who simply thrives on comics, which were very popular at the time. Naz is a 60s or 70s child, obviously she's carefree, a bit of a flirt, you get the gist. And Kevin was a 90s kid because he's a bully, he rides his bike as an escape, and his dad was most likely controlling and abusive, which is why in the afterlife he imagines his dad showering him with a lot of gifts. Now I'm not saying this is a foolproof theory, but I'm also not not saying that. Coming in at number 9 are the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 1. Again, one of my favorite shows. I just saw the old live action remake and loved it. Have yet to go as Betty for Halloween, but soon come, I promise. Anyway, based off the show, you'd assume Bedrock was situated in the Stone Age. I mean, why wouldn't you? They're called the Flintstones, they live in Bedrock. This is basically Stone Age propaganda. Either way, this theory claims they actually live in a post-apocalyptic society. Now think about it, the show is basically based on the modern West. They reference technology, religion, culture all the time. Stone Age people didn't have any of that. The theory goes on to say after many nuclear disasters, the entirety of Western civilization collapsed, and so the generations after them recovered just enough to create a society based on what they remembered. At number 8, we have the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 2. I love when the theories are so juicy they need a Part 2. I'm just sat there like, yes, girl, yes. Anyways, this sub-theory features a crossover we all died for. The Jetsons meet the Flintstones. I wanted to be in the Jetsons so bad. When I watched it when I was younger, I literally thought by now, like by 2019, we'd be living in a world like that, yet we still don't even have like flying cars or houses. This is shocking. Well, I've been fed lies. This is a betrayal. Either way, moving swiftly on before I get further triggered. The theory goes on to say the Flintstones and the Jetsons actually lived in the same world at the same time. In this post-apocalyptic society they live in, and we became so divided that one group live in a super advanced society, whereas another group is barely hanging on the edges of technology. All the talking animals living with the Flintstones are synthetic creations. I mean, all the real animals have been extinct for forever, and no one acknowledges how stupid it is for them to talk to things that didn't even exist with early humans. But, that's none of my business. Filling on number 7 slot is Scooby-Dooby Depression. I literally bought all the extra Scooby-Doo long episode movie things as a kid, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched both live action movies. That is my shit. But either way, from their slang, all the flowers on the mystery machine, even the gang's clothing, you can tell the show was set in the 60s. And the theory claims that it was set during one of the worst economic depressions ever. And if you think about it long enough, it actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the show, everything is either falling apart or abandoned. Hotels are empty, theme parks are ruined, every villain they catch is actually someone who would normally be respected, like a teacher or a scientist or a historian, but they've just fallen on hard times and have just turned to petty crime in this dark period of life. And no, I definitely didn't forget about the gang. You'd think they were just hippies out looking for adventure, but really they're like in their late teens, early 20s, not interested in getting proper jobs. They move around all the time because there are no jobs available no matter where they go. They wear the same clothes every day. Do they shower? No one really knows for sure. Do they pay for petrol? I don't know. In conclusion, they're unemployed hobos that accept petrol and food for helping those around them. Knife in my heart, dagger in my chest. Now at number 6 is the Rugrats affair. Now this was a cute show, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't my favorite because I thought it was just too grown up for that baby stuff, but it did the job. According to this theory, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, most of the babies on the show aren't real apparently. They're all figments of Angelica's imagination, since she actually has no friends. That sounded really savage, I didn't mean it like that. Angelica, you're a lovely girl. She makes up these friends to make up for the fact her parents are too busy working to make time for her. Angelica bases all her friends on the dead children of her parents' friends. I don't know how believable that bit was, but we carry on anyway. Tommy was stillborn, which explains why Stu's always in the basement making toys. Chucky died with his mum, which explains why Chaz is a nervous wreck 24/7. And Phil and Lil were actually aborted, or their parents suffered a miscarriage. So because Angelica didn't know the baby's gender, she just created twins. What do you guys think? Bible or Coming in at number 5 is Courage the Cowardly Delusion. Now this was my least favorite show on the channel and I never wanted to watch it. Who makes a kids show that creepy and dark? I don't get it. Courage was definitely its own niche, and this theory claims Courage was actually Cerberus the Hellhound. Think about it, his only goal in every episode is to protect Muriel and Eustace and the house in the middle of nowhere. Their house is legit in the middle of a barren hellhole, so Courage, aka Cerberus, always stays in hell, which is nowhere, to protect mankind Mind, aka Muriel from the underworld, which is characterized by all the villains he meets. The quack representing greed, cats representing hate, and etc. And if you're wondering where that leaves Eustace, he's Hades and he rules over and hates everything in hell. And honestly, I can totally see this theory being true. You guys, I wouldn't even bat an eyelid. I wouldn't even be surprised. At number 4 is Inspector Gadget versus Inspector Gadget. I only remember watching this show while having breakfast and getting ready for primary school in the morning. Like, I don't recall it ever being on in the evening. Is that just me? Let me know. Either way, Inspector Gadget was always up against his arch nemesis, Dr. Claw, but we never got to see his face. It's like Miss Bellum in the Powerpuff Girls, like, that fat. I know she's gonna be hot, just show me her. Sorry, got sidetracked, but you know, when she's slim thick, you know? Either way, this theory claims a very specific reason we never get to see Dr. Claw, because he is the original Inspector Gadget. Gasp! The original Inspector Gadget was actually a cop who died on the job, but he was the police force's best guy, and they couldn't bear to part with him. So they built a robot that acted and looked exactly like him, but there was one problem. The guy never actually died. He survived, and when he saw that he was replaced with a robot, he became bitter and turned into the notorious Dr. Claw. I mean, it explains why they're never in the same place at the same time, so you never know. Third at number 3 slot is Samurai Utonium. I can proudly say I think I've seen nearly all the Powerpuff Girls episodes, and thankfully I tried to avoid Samurai Jack as much as possible, but I heard they rebooted it a few years ago. Hope that's good. But can we just acknowledge the fact that Jack is literally Professor Utonium, but with a man bun and a katana? Like, this theory claims that Jack and Professor Utonium are the same person, and that during his final showdown with Aku, Jack and him are launched into a time portal that Aku himself created. By using all his dark power, Aku gets turned into a liquid version of himself, which translates to Chemical X in a new world and time period that Jack, aka Professor Utonium, now lives in. Jack/Utonium dedicates his life to studying Chemical X and eventually makes good use of Aku by creating the girls. So he was evil, but the girls combat that, so it just really comes full circle, doesn't it? Now at number 2 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 1. Absolutely loved Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. It was so cute and funny and refreshing, and all the little imaginary friends were just little gems. Either way, the premise of the show is that kids have imaginary friends that everyone can see, and we all just kind of coexist.
Oh, that's what this is called?
Imaginary friends, they give them to Foster's Home, created by Madam Foster. It gives the imaginary friends shelter and the option to get adopted by new kids. The Madam Foster runs the house with her granddaughter Frankie and her own imaginary friend, Mr. Harriman. This theory argues that Madam Foster isn't real. She died due to old age, and Frankie was heartbroken and just couldn't get over the loss. So she probably imagined Madam Foster so no one would find out at the home because she was so dearly loved. I mean, this honestly explains why Madam Foster is always so childlike and energetic despite being ancient. It also ties in with why Frankie just can't move on from her life at Foster's because the home is actually hers. Finally, at number 1 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 2. The juiciness of the theory continues, but the twist here is that Frankie is actually the imaginary friend, not Madam Foster. The other side of this theory argues Frankie is just a younger version of Madam Foster. They're even wearing the same thing. Madam Foster imagined up Frankie because if it was up to her, she would have been a lot younger when managing the home, but she's just too old for it now. Think about it. Frankie never has imaginary friends of her own. She doesn't even want one. She acts human, but she's most likely not. It also explains why she's so happy staying at the home looking after everyone instead of going to college or something, for example. Both are completely plausible. Who do you think is imaginary, Madam Foster or Frankie?
Coming in at number 10, we have the Brenda theory. There is a theory out there that says that actually the Powerpuff Girls are all in the brain of one psychotic child with a personality disorder. Now apparently this stems from a traumatizing upbringing involving abuse and bullying. The theory says that the girls all show 3 character traits imagined by Brenda in order to help her cope. I'm reading from the fan-made Brenda theory here. Blossom represents the girl that Brenda wanted to be. Brenda wanted to be mature and level-headed, a young girl that had an ego to boot. Bubbles represents her soft and bubbly side. She also symbolises the innocence and submissiveness that Brenda had possessed in reality. On a few rare occasions, however, a bit of Brenda's aggressive nature would be manifested in Bubbles, and as a result, Bubbles is often shown as being rather feisty in the main series. Buttercup is Brenda's aggressive side. Buttercup was created from Brenda's thoughts of retaliating against her older brother, and Buttercup ultimately represents her dissatisfaction with her life.
However, despite Buttercup representing her violent side, she's still shown as having hidden depths to her character. These depths, however, are most reserved for Bubbles' persona, as mentioned above. There we go. The theory continues by saying that Brenda dreams up a fictitious town and monsters in order to help her cope with her abusers, imagining herself taking them down. Who's Brenda? Coming in at number 9, one of the writers had a crush on underage girls. This is actually a bit inflammatory and, it's a bit of a horrifying theory. It was circulated on the internet a couple of years ago, and it seemed to suggest that the character Jared Shapiro was actually shaped on show writer Jake Goldman, who's a grown adult man, making a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. So here's how the whole wild theory was shaped. The character of Jared is a love interest to Blossom, but he appears oddly shirtless at one point with bulging muscles. Again, very strange. Now, the character is actually voiced by Goldman, and some people were saying that the character was made to represent him, which is a bit weird and awkward because of the whole underage girl lushing on him thing. Just as this nasty theory was gaining traction, another writer from the Cartoon Network actually jumped in to defend him and said that there was no sinister intentions here, and that he didn't have a hand in writing the character, he just voiced it. Nonetheless, a few people aren't keen on the whole shirtless man in front of a child thing. It's a bit of a strange plotline, cartoon or otherwise. Although it does seem to put to bed the whole underage writer girl thing, which, I think we need to retire that narrative. Coming into number 8,
I'm gonna react to the Hunt ad starring Mr. Beast and his mom. Wait, Mom, before you check out.
Jojo actually fancies the girls. I don't even know what to say about this. It's sort of twisted, but I found it on a fan theory site as part of the imaginary theory. The theorist said that actually the girls were normal children who pretended to be superheroes to escape their abusive father, who kept them in a basement with their half-brother. The theory reads, and these aren't my words, Mojo Jojo was sexually interested in his younger siblings, and he attempted to capture them in any way he saw fit. This is supposedly the reason as to why he's the most feared figure in the main series. This is actually utterly horrifying. I like that theory. Coming into number 7, we have him is Satan and Santa Claus at the very same time. There's a pretty strong and convincing theory out there that him is both Lucifer and Santa Claus. First and foremost, he literally has claws. So Klaus, claws, claws, Klaus. Much of a much. Second of all, let's have a little look at his outfit, because to me, if he isn't Santa, I don't know, he is doing some pretty legit Santa cosplay in my opinion. He's got a red suit with white fluffy detail. Check. Big black boots with a big buckle. Check. Gloves. Check. Rosy cheeks. Check. Although I have to say, he does kind of look a bit like an evil elf too. Elves make stuff, so maybe that's why he's got pincer hands. Maybe he's like an evil Santa Claus elf thing, hybrid. Okay, now Satan. Well, he's red, he's evil, he's pointy, his eyes are yellow, and his feet look like cloven hooves. Hooves! Why does Santa look like him though? Why does him look like Santa though? It's baffling. Okay, so if him is Satan / Santa Claus, could this mean that Professor Utonium is God? And the Powerpuff Girls are Jesus? This is all coming in at number 6. Think about it though, right? Professor Utonium wears a lot of white, which is a godly colour. We did decide upon one. The Professor creates the girl, so he is a creator of sorts, a lot like God. And his story is kind of biblical. One of his creations turns against him, Mojo Jojo, which is kind of like how the angel Gabriel betrayed God, or so the Book of Enoch goes. The girls then could all be an embodiment of Jesus. They are supposed to be good, etc. If the Professor is God, then a lot of people would feel kind of weird and uncomfortable about that. But actually, perhaps the show is throwing shade at scientists, presenting him as a false god, a man of science who tries to play a creator and ends up causing a few catastrophes. Hey, a little side note here, I was googling Professor Utonium God, and Professor Utonium Hot came up, and guys, can you just chill out? Very, very thirsty of you all, and he's a cartoon. So actually I'm going with this theory up next. Instead to me, I don't think he's God. Actually, perhaps he's the real villain of the show. This is all coming in at number 5. So there's a lot to unpack with the Professor, so let's start surface here. He wanted to make the perfect little girl, which is actually pretty creepy if you think about it. Also, in the case of Mojo Jojo, he clearly is pro-animal testing. There's a whole theory out there circulating that the Professor is anti-LGBTQ and that he and him are actually brothers. Now this is circulated in a number of tweets by Juma Eid and also in a video by Bxndz, which has had over 100,000 views. So basically the theory goes that some people think that the professor hated his brother because actually him wanted to be a trans female. Him is seemingly gender fluid. The theory continues by saying that the professor actually tried to poison him, giving him a potion to appear as monstrous as he thought that he appeared in real life, but instead, actually, he gave them special abilities. And it's thought that him called himself him to mock their brother, but actually enjoys living life as a woman. I don't know. I'm not saying I agree with any of this, but these are the theories. Now, the next one is kind of similar. People are convinced that as a show, Powerpuff Girls is anti-LGBTQ. This is all coming into number 4. A lot of people aren't happy with the way that him is presented as a cross-dresser and sometimes has trans characteristics, but then is painted as a villain. Him is flamboyant, wears thigh-high boots, and when Buttercup dresses as him, she puts on lipstick and a feather boa. Feature a trans character, sure, but why is he portrayed as evil? Is it demonizing trans people? Adding to this strange theory, in 2016, the Powerpuff reboot had a trans horse that wanted to be a unicorn. Now, in the episode, Buttercup encounters Donnie, a talking horse who runs around with a fake horn on his head. He says, I may not have a horn, but I do have a heart, and in that heart, I know I'm a beautiful unicorn. Touching words. He then undergoes a transmorphing potion, but ends up as a monster. Now, executive producers said that this episode was about positive identity, but many people were confused by the anti-surgery message. Coming into number 3, the Powerpuff Girls are all high. This actually doesn't seem like too much of a stretch, because look, they do look super high. I mean, look at the size of their eyes. Especially look at Blossom's eyes. Like, have you ever seen higher eyes in your life? No, you haven't. The girls are addicted to candy, which could be a thinly veiled reference to actual drugs. They're also very cheery, and the world around them that they live in is absolutely nuts. Maybe it's all just one big trip. Coming into number 2, it is a prequel to 28 Days Later. What? Mojo Jojo is kind of cray, right? Why? Well, one theory says that he has rage, and that the cartoon is an early prequel to the horror movie 28 Days Later. Did Professor Utonium create the strain of virus that caused uncontrollable rage like he created the girls? In the movie 28 Days Later, we see chimpanzees with the rage virus escaping. Was one of them Mojo Jojo or an ancestor of his? I guess it kind of is a bit of a wild theory, but you know, that's what we're here for. Finally, coming into number 1, we have that Powerpuff Girls is actually a horror show, and if we reclassified it as such, it would be ranked as one of the scariest shows of all time. Alright, I mean, like, really think about it. Frankenstein is a horror novel, and the girls and Mojo Jojo are pretty
We gotta... Actually, let's finish this.
similar to Dr. Frankenstein's monsters, are they not? The girls themselves use their dad's technology to create the monstrous bunny, who later explodes. Yes, explodes in their faces because she isn't anatomically stable. The Powerpuff Girls go well beyond one of the most iconic horror fictions of all time, too. It isn't just a crack scientist bringing things to life, but like we said, there are strong
I think that's
devil themes
I
going
think it's the
on.
dude.
One episode
This is
seemingly set in hell, where
I believe they were brothers or something like that, and he wanted to be trans or whatever. No,
oh, that was that story. That was about him.
Yeah,
okay. I thought it was about the.
No, that was about him.
Okay.
him brings people back from the
See,
dead.
like him.
And then there's that guy who makes the Powerpuff Girls copy dolls. His name's Dick Hardy, which is a whole different ballgame. Dick Hardy then sells the girls into slavery and worse. And then there's the episode where a magician tries to murder Blossom, and the one where the professor has to eat a pea with a gun to his head. It's absolutely nuts. And there's an episode where the Sandman is given awful nightmares so vile that he will never truly sleep again, which is like utterly disturbing. And I almost forgot, there's an episode where Mitch, some kid from the girls' class at school, tries to squeeze a hamster to death. I mean, honestly, after doing this video, I'm thinking, what is wrong with Powerpuff Girls? It is harrowing. So guys, that was the top 10 scary Powerpuff Girls theories. What did you think to this list? Shall we do more cartoon theories?
This was crazy. The Powerpuff Girl one was probably the most craziest one out of all of them. I'm gonna be honest. But that's it for this video, man. We out this thing.
Yeah.
Gang.